Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to introduce the speakers. And it's great to see everybody, even though we're not in the same room together. So we're going to start off by introducing Andrew Chaban. He is the CEO of Princeton Properties, but he has been involved in this association for many years on the local, state, and national level. And it's been very, very good to volunteer his time to do so many great things for our association. So I'll let Andrew start. Tell us a little bit about the update for the national. Andrew?
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. I'm glad everybody is together, sort of. Coming to you live from Logan Airport. So wanted to just share with you a little bit about NAHB's highlights, especially coming off of the Builder Show. Resolving the supply chain bottlenecks, higher prices for lumber and other building materials, and rising tariffs on Canadian lumber has been the top priorities. We recently received a key win when the Commerce Department announced it was cutting tariffs by 35%, but the fight is certainly far from over. In another victory for NAHB, OSHA rescinded its vaccine mandate and testing rule for businesses 1 week after NAHB sent the agency a letter urging that it withdraw the rule. NAHB is supporting efforts of all 50 Republican senators to urge the EPA to halt the waters of the U.S. rulemaking process, while the U.S. Supreme Court considers a case on the Clean Waters Act. And lastly, as I mentioned, a robust turnout at the 2022 International Builder Show signals the strength of the home building industry. Over 45,000 building professionals and almost 75,000 folks attended Design and Construction Week. Also, NAHB and Michigan home builders scored an important legal win in September, meaning that all of us who applied for the PPP or Paycheck Protection Program loans, if you are a member of NAHB, can be forgiven by definition. So another value of membership. The Supreme Court struck down the CDC eviction moratorium, something near and dear to my heart, in late August. What many of you don't know is that nearly all NAHB members had been exempt from the eviction ban since March of 2021, based on a court case that we had in Ohio. We continue efforts to ensure that our members have the tools to access any emergency rental assistance funding and assistance that is available. So it's two really tremendous items for being a member of NAHB, the PPP protection program, automatic forgiveness, as well as the CDC eviction moratorium exemption if you were an NAHB member, because we won a class action suit. So let me go quickly into depth on a few of these items, and then I'll take some questions if there's time, Carol. With lumber prices experiencing extreme volatility, which we all know, NAHB has been relentless on all fronts to ensure a lasting and stable supply of lumber and other building materials for the home building industry at a competitive price. NAHB's focus on lumber tariffs recently paid dividends when the Commerce Department announced on January 31st that would cut the tariffs 35% on shipments of Canadian lumber into the U.S. When tariffs doubled last November, Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post reached out to NAHB on how this would impact housing affordability. Both outlets used our material to run scathing editorials opposing the tariff hike. This helped to lay the groundwork for the tariff reductions announced at the end of January. Since lumber prices began their second surge in late summer of 2021, NAHB has been actively engaged with the White House, Commerce Secretary Raimondo, and members of Congress to call for the following actions: to seek immediate remedies to the lumber and building material supply chain bottlenecks, to increase the domestic supply of timber from public lands, and to negotiate a new softwood lumber agreement with Canada that would eliminate tariffs. It should be noted that our dear friend Bob Baldwin from Rhode Island has helped significantly with Secretary Raimondo. That's been very, very helpful to us. So, a couple of things about economics. Continue its campaign into 2020. NAHB dominated the news cycle on lumber prices. Paul Lopez, our own Vice President of External Affairs, generated over $92 million in earned media. And just think about that. We generated what would normally cost $92 million just by providing interviews and material, the scope of a national media campaign, without spending a dime other than his salary, frankly. Most recently, we've delivered our message that the rising lumber prices since late summer have added more than $18,600 to the price of a new home, and the policymakers must act now to fight these affordability headwinds. And as everybody knows, lumber has clearly been at the top of the priority list for NAHB and frankly all of us. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about significant regulatory uncertainty having to do with WOTUS, or the waters of the U.S. Sections of the pre-2015 rules have been found unlawful by the courts, and the guidance documents provided by the agencies have been superseded by more current guidance. What that really means is that all the rules that the Trump administration put in are being usurped by the Biden administration, and we are going to have real trouble developing things that are near any basic body of water. And the definition of what is a water of the U.S., instead of it being connected, if you will, to an ocean or a larger body, in some jurisdictions are literally being turned into ephemeral streams, roadside drainage ditches, call it what you will. And that's going to be coming to Massachusetts, you can bet, relatively soon. It's going to be harder and harder to develop. As Russ has pointed out to us many times, we're only building 40% of what we built only 10 years ago in terms of building permits in the Commonwealth, and this is not going to help. On a really good note, the attendance at this year's show, I mentioned, exceeded our expectations, and reflects the enthusiasm of the home building industry to collaborate and discover the latest products and technology solutions for our customers. Exhibit space exceeded 425,000 net square feet. More than 800 exhibitors, really cool. 1,200 exhibitors total, including the folks at Design and Construction Week, meaning the Kitchen Industry Bath Show. So a lot of square footage and a lot of bodies. There's tremendous demand. Next year is Las Vegas as opposed to Orlando, and that should even drive demand even higher. Next year, the dates are January 31st to February 2nd in Las Vegas. So I think I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions from anybody.
This isn't just about protecting yourself, it's also about protecting those around you. Please, if you're in need of a disposable mask or have any questions.
Russ, I'll probably need you to translate if there's any questions.
Yep.
I have a question about that rental thing. Like if people haven't paid their rent, how does the landlord get that reimbursement or help or whatever?
Carol's question is that, you know, if the people who, the renters who are renting the units, they don't pay, how do you get reimbursed through the federal government for that? Is there a reimbursement program?
There's a program in Massachusetts, several, but the main one is called RAFT, R-A-F-T, Rental Assistance for Families in Transition is what it actually stands for. And basically, monies are available for anyone who can prove, even tangentially, that COVID has had some impact on their family or their ability to pay. So it's really not a high bar or a high standard. If anybody's got any questions about it, they're certainly welcome to reach out to me. We can put them in touch with the folks who administer the program. But in essence, you can call the local housing authority. They can tell you who in their community is administering RAFT funds, and they can help you. I can tell you that with our tower in downtown Lowell, which is the neediest population in our portfolio, we have received more than $425,000 worth of rental reimbursement for delinquency from the RAFT program alone.
And that rental.
Customer the last name of Hawkburg. If you're here in the gate area, please make your way to the podium. Customer the last.
Russ, I'm sorry, get to speak up there.
Yeah. Now, is that going to come in as tax revenue for you as well, because you're getting the payments? That'll still be taxed.
The answer is yes. You treat it exactly as if it were received as rental revenue from the resident.
Also, customers Nobrae, Quinlan, and
Other questions from the national?
Please make your way to the podium.
Anything else, guys?
I think we're good. Has there been a lot of talk about what's happening with the fact that a lot of people are going to be facing, we're going to be shutting down gas usage in all of these communities in Massachusetts for one. Is that going across the country as well? Do you know, Andrew?
Everything is going to cost more. You know, the fact that we have this issue with Russia and Ukraine, which Russia supplies 10% of the world's oil and energy. That's going to drive prices up, as you're seeing even at the pump. If you filled up today, you'll see it. It's certainly, premiums now over $4 a gallon, and that's going to drive the price of what it takes to take diesel fuel and drive lumber. So it's just one more difficulty in terms of housing affordability, Russ.
Well, I was talking about natural gas for heating fuels, for homes. And here in Massachusetts, we think we're gonna be faced, as you know, with the state kind of trying to shut that down as they can, community by community. Is that something that's happening on a national level as well?
It is.
For heating?
It is, and there's clearly a movement to what they believe to be, less fossil fuels and more electrification. The really interesting part about that is that what does it take to produce electricity? Natural gas. So in essence, they're trying to do it, and they're trying to put a green wrapper on it. And the real sad truth is that the more electric we produce, it is actually a net negative for the environment as opposed to actually burning natural gas. So nobody really wants to talk about that, but by restricting natural gas use and forcing more homes to be heated with or powered with electricity solely, it's actually a net negative to the environment.
I think the other part of that problem is that there's going to be an increased demand on the utility lines, the primary lines feeding these communities, that's not being discussed. I mean, the power company in Massachusetts, both utilities, have spent millions of dollars to lower usage on their utility lines. They're not doing that to be just a nice community person. They're doing that because they don't want to put an investment in that infrastructure. And as we start swapping over, this is going to become a major problem, I think. I ask them that question all the time, and they have no response.
They don't have a response for us. They don't have a response for the reasons you just outlined. They don't want to discuss the reality of it.
We're all going to be faced with brownouts in the future, or rolling blackouts like they do in California.
Russ, can I ask if they know what the transformer problem?
I don't know if that's Andrew, Mark just brought this up too. We're having discussions on a local level about there's going to be a shortage of transformers to be purchased. Mark and I are concerned about that because we're trying to work with the utilities to figure out how do we deal with that, because we may have subdivisions that get built and then we find out we can't get a transformer because they're back on it. We've been hearing numbers like 50 weeks to get a transformer to each one of these subdivisions, or for a commercial facility as well. And we're just beginning to talk about it now, but we see it as a huge problem. And I don't know if there's been any discussions on the national level, because this shortage is going to be not just here in New England. This is going to be a national shortage of transformers. And we think that we have to have discussions to try and push the utility to say, once we put that work order in for that subdivision or commercial facility, they need to tag that transformer to make sure that we have that. We can't have an entire subdivision built and then not be able to put power in there. It's going to bankrupt people, and it's going to hurt the banking community as well.
Russ, it's happening more in Massachusetts than in other places, and it is being discussed at the national level. But no surprise, it's happening more in the blue states than it is the red states, right? The red states won't stand for it. Their politicians won't stand for it, and therefore the utility companies react accordingly. So you're going to find it happening in the Northeast, and you're going to find it happening on the West Coast, but you're not seeing those kinds of problems to this magnitude in the middle of the country.
Yeah. Any other questions for Andrew? Yes. I guess you can go to the airline and get in line now and have your scotch.
Okay, Carol, I hope I've done my job. Guys, enjoy your meeting. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. But now we have a few minutes before Ben. If Ben wants to, oh, there's Ben. Ben, do you want to go ahead and start?
I'm here to accommodate you, Carol.
Thank you, Ben.
Just like everyone.
Good evening, Ben. My job tonight is to introduce the speakers, make sure we all understand who they are. I think most of us understand who you are. But Ben has been representing us at the state level. He's our lobbyist for our association. He's been with us many, many, many years, and has done an unbelievable job for us. When you think about where your dues are spent, there's a lot of reasons why to belong to this association, but this is probably one of the #1 and highest reasons to belong to the job that he has done in our behalf. So Ben, please go ahead and let us know what state of the state is.
Thank you very much, Russ. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And this is so convenient to be able to do this this way. Even when the pandemic's over, I think we're still going to be using this a lot in the future. So why don't I go through? I've got a lot to cover because unfortunately, or fortunately, there is just so much going on at the State House and with state government and the issues that are challenging our members really each and every day. What I am not going to do is steal Rob Brennan's thunder because Rob will be coming up after me. And Rob, for those of you who don't know, of Cape Built Development is the chair of our Government Affairs Committee following John Smolak's many, many years of serving in that role. What Rob is going to talk to you about is our efforts relative to the proposed new net zero building code, which was released by the Department of Energy Resources just some 2.5 weeks ago. For builders and others who haven't taken a look at it, I urge you to do so. This, of course, was the result of the climate change legislation that was enacted by the legislature in January of last year of 2021. And one part of that requires the Department of Energy Resources to draft a new local option specialized stretch code, including a definition of net zero. Of course, this is traditionally the job of the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, but the environmental community, the climate advocates simply argued that Division of Energy Resources would be more appropriate. I think they were concerned about how the BBRS would come out on this. It's been over a year, and as I said, DOER just released what they call a straw proposal, a proposal for reaction from the public, and we'll be looking at that. And Rob's going to talk to you about that and about a exciting study that we're undertaking with the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, jointly with the Wentworth Institute of Technology. I'll leave it at that and let him talk to you more about that. So let me talk to you about some of the other things. First and foremost, in the housing choice legislation, which this association strongly supported, put forward by Governor Baker to advance housing production of all types in Massachusetts, which was finally enacted by the legislature last year. Not only does it address the quantum of vote necessary to adopt local zoning, reducing that from a 2/3 vote to a mere majority for pro-housing zoning, by the way. Only if you're going to upzone for housing is the vote merely a majority of town meeting or city council. If you're going to downzone, then it still remains the 2/3 vote that it was in the law. So we're excited about that. We're hopeful that builders, developers will identify potential projects, go meet with a local planning board, try to get the support of the planning board, the selectmen, the city council, and then your ability to get that vote to rezone a parcel, again, will it be that much easier because it's a mere majority vote. But the other key element in that legislation was the new mandate for so-called MBTA communities to zone a district of so-called reasonable size near a commuter rail station, bus station, other transportation node for multifamily housing as a matter of right. Not special permit, not a variance, but multifamily housing is a matter of right with a minimum density of 15 units to an acre. So again, that was part of the law enacted last year. The law also directed the Department of Housing and Community Development to propose or draft, regulations and guidelines. And late December, the administration put forward those draft regulations and guidelines. We've been reviewing them. Mark Kablak, and some of you know Mark, land use attorney, who has also chaired our Government Affairs Committee. He's been reviewing those, as has John Smolak and myself, and we're prepared to submit comment to the administration by the end of March on that. But overall, we're pretty pleased with these regulations. We're excited about it. For communities that fail to adopt these by right zoning districts, they will lose out on significant state funding from a number of capital accounts and other funding programs that the state has. But notwithstanding the fact that communities will lose out on that money, they are still obligated by law to establish these districts. And I mention that to you because I read recently that one of the city councilors, I think in the city of Newton, when the city council there was discussing this with the city planner, he suggested that maybe the city should do a cost benefit analysis. In other words, is the benefit of any monies that they're getting from the state outweighed by the alleged cost of new housing, thereby insinuating, I guess, that, well, maybe Newton will just ignore the law and lose out on the money. Let me tell you, I've talked to the folks in the administration, and the position of the administration and other lawyers that I know is communities don't have a choice. They have to do this. If they don't, not only will they lose out on that money, but I do believe that there will be an opportunity for the right developer with the right project to bring an action to force the community to allow for multifamily that fits within the framework of this law. If you are interested in multifamily development, if you know our members who are, I urge you to go to the state website. It's pretty easy, www.mass.gov/MBTA zoning. They have a great deal of information there. And what I should mention is that the state has come up with guidelines because they understand that sort of one size doesn't fit all, right? The legislation said a community must adopt a zoning district within a half a mile if you have a commuter rail station, or within a certain distance of any other sort of community center, but of reasonable size. And what's reasonable size? It's geographic, it's the number of units that you have to allow to be built. And they've really come up with a rubric which you apply to a community. So in other words, if a community has an MBTA rail station in it, then they're going to have to allow for more multifamily housing than a community that doesn't have a commuter rail, but might have a bus station or serviced by the MBTA in another way. Now, I thought initially when this law was proposed that, well, we're only talking about towns that are serviced, or cities and towns that are serviced by commuter rail or the T. I was surprised to learn that I believe there is nearly 172 communities which are deemed MBTA communities. So this isn't just Boston. This, you'll be surprised if you go on the website, it lists every community, and you'd be surprised that it really goes out to many suburban and even exurban communities that I think many of our members might build in, because most of our members don't build in Boston proper or in Cambridge or Somerville, right? So I think that this is a great opportunity. And as I said, those regulations are out there for comment, and we'll be submitting comment by August 31st on that. So that's a real plus. That's a boom for housing. I think in some instances, a developer that might have gone 40B might choose to go this route because for those who have done 40B, you know, it's extremely expensive. It's very time consuming. You've got to get all of your consultants and get through mass housing or DHCD or MHP. You have the limitations on profit and so on. The mandate for 20 to 25% affordable housing. You don't have those kinds of same kinds of restrictions here because again, they're supposed to zone for a district as a matter of right. A couple of other things. The administration at the Department of Environmental Protection and at the MEPA office has been going through a process for, well, actually since the fall. And they meet almost every Friday, 1 to 4 in the afternoon. I don't know who decided Friday afternoon meetings from 1 to 4 is a good idea. But we are fortunate that John Smolak represents the association and our members on that body, on the advisory committee that was formed by Undersecretary Abby Kim, that is relooking at the regulations regarding the MEPA program. This is another sort of fallout from the major climate change legislation. That legislation has required now various environmental regulations to be relooked at from the perspective of an environmental justice community. So a lot of it is having to do with notification for individuals who live in a so-called environmental justice community, taking certain additional steps to minimize impacts from a project in those communities. Now, having said that, in my experience, MEPA doesn't come up that often for our members in the traditional work that they do. There is a threshold before you trigger MEPA, and those are for larger projects and projects in certain areas that, by and large, our members aren't involved in. But it does come up from time to time. And as I said, we're fortunate to have John Smolak and all of his expertise, someone who's been through the MEPA process for his members on multiple occasions. Another thing we're involved in is, and it relates back to the subject that I wasn't going to talk about, which is net zero. And again, I'll leave that to Rob Brennan. But some of you might recall that 2 years ago, the town of Brookline adopted a bylaw prohibiting the building commissioner or building inspectors from issuing any building permits for a project that would require installation of natural gas infrastructure. A gas ban, a ban on the use of new natural gas. That was adopted by a town meeting. Because Brookline is a town ordinances and bylaws must all be reviewed by the Attorney General. And so that was sent to Attorney General Maura Healey some 2 years ago. The Home Builders Association joined with other organizations to submit a legal memorandum to the Attorney General, arguing that this bylaw was illegal. Ultimately, she struck it down. Hopefully you recall this. She struck it down for a number of reasons, but primarily because the state building code preempts communities from adopting local building codes that are state laws governing gas utilities, gas service, and so on. Again, are preempt local laws. And those were the primary reasons that she struck it down. Well, Brookline was not to be deterred. And if you were unaware, last June of 21, they went back to town meeting in Brookline, and they adopted yet another bylaw in an attempt to ban new gas installation. But they took a different tack with this. Instead of a general bylaw prohibiting the building inspector from issuing permits, they adopted it as a zoning bylaw. And it's a zoning bylaw that applies to any project that needs a special permit. Now, for those of you who've gone through permitting, you know that you have no right to a special permit, right? A special permit is discretionary, whether granted by the planning board, the ZBA, the city council. So it's a discretionary permit. And again, for those of you who've gone through this, you know that often there are many conditions imposed on that special permit. So what Brookline did was they said, we're going to amend our zoning bylaw. And if you need a special permit, one of the conditions of the special permit will be you can't connect to natural gas. So as an effort to do an end run around the Attorney General's ruling, again, the association joined with NAHB, the Commercial Real Estate Association, in submitting a legal memorandum to the Attorney General on this. As you might imagine, the various utilities have all weighed in heavily with her office. But I have to tell you that I'm worried about this one, candidly, because the argument from Brookline and the environmental groups that have filed petitions and memorandums with the AG, they argue that, again, special permits are discretionary. Number one, you're not entitled to it as a matter of right. Secondly, usually when you get a special permit, there's some benefit that usually comes along with that special permit. For instance, maybe a use that otherwise isn't allowed in the district, but with a special permit, you're allowed to have it. Or maybe there's a reduction in some dimensional requirements that otherwise you'd have to comply with. So their argument is, this is just another condition, and that's appropriate. My argument is that the conditions that are legal and imposed on a special permit have to be conditions that relate to that project and the impacts of that project in particular. How does that project impact local traffic? How does that project impact stormwater runoff and so on? You can't make that same argument if you say every project is banned from using natural gas, right? It's not unique. There's not a nexus to that project itself. But having said that, I'll also add that when the Attorney General struck down the prior Brookline bylaw, she wasn't running for governor. So I'm worried that the politics may change to that one. We expect a ruling fairly soon on that, and it will be extremely important because if she upholds the Brookline bylaw, I'm concerned about two things. One, I think it will encourage communities to make more uses subject to a special permit rather than by right. And then, of course, they'll all add this condition to ban natural gas, which is of great concern to us, to our members, and of course, to the people who buy and live in the homes that our members build. So that's a major issue I wanted to mention to you. I guess since I'm talking about energy, I should tell you that the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Massachusetts is a member of a broad coalition. It's called the Mass Coalition for Sustainable Energy. It's composed of various chambers of commerce, business organizations like Associated Industries of Massachusetts, again, NAHB, the Commercial Real Estate Association, ourselves, also many of the utilities that are trying to put forward reasonable proposals in reaction to the climate activists and their efforts to ban any future natural gas. And we're very active in that, meeting twice a month with that organization. Again, staying on the issue of heat, the governor issued an executive order many months ago, actually it was last summer, establishing the Governor's Commission on Clean Heat. This was also a recommendation from that came about in part from that climate legislation. And here, current HBA President Emerson Kloss is our representative appointed by the governor. On this group, they started meeting back in January. They meet once a week. Their job is to consider the future of heating buildings and structures in Massachusetts. As you might imagine, there are many environmental organizations there, they're represented, but there are business groups, chambers, other individuals of various expertise. I can't tell you much about what's happening there because Emerson would tell you that up to this point, they're trying to keep those discussions confidential. They will be opening up the process so the public can zoom in and watch these meetings. As you might imagine, of course, most of the environmental groups are arguing that the future of clean heat does not involve natural gas, propane, and the like. I think we all know that where they want to go with all of this is all electric all the time for all buildings and structures in Massachusetts. And you know, that might be possible, of course, for a single family home, but when some of the larger commercial or lab developers will tell you it's simply impossible. So yet that's another group that we're involved in. A couple of other things quickly. As you know, of course, with this housing crisis, we've also had an issue of regarding multifamily and rents. Rents in Boston, Somerville, Cambridge, and other places have been going through the roof. Last year, there was a major push by various tenant organizations to reinstate rent control or to allow individual cities and towns to adopt rent control. The legislative session ended last year with no action on that. There is even more pressure to do so this year. I can't tell you how that's going to come out other than to say that the Joint Committee on Housing has extended until later in the spring taking any action on the bill. And that's certainly helpful to us, to the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, which really kind of takes the lead on these issues of landlord-tenant. The other bill that might actually have more of a chance is legislation to allow tenants to have a right of first refusal when an apartment building comes up for sale. Developer wants to sell it, the owner wants to sell it. It allows the tenants to organize themselves, gives them an opportunity to make an offer to purchase. As you might imagine, there's all kinds of difficulties and problems around that legislation. But that is something that from the Cambridge, Somerville sort of delegation, they are pushing very, very hard. Again, that's been extended to later in the spring. So we'll see what happens with that one. The association, as many of you know, develops its own bills. And we have filed a package of bills as we do every legislative session. I'm pleased to tell you that most of the bills that we have filed, which were heard by the various committees, I testified numerous times over the past year. And all those hearings, by the way, were remote like this, which was quite convenient so that I didn't have to drive to Boston, pay all that money to park, and then sit in a hearing room for 3 hours before I could testify. I could sit at my desk at home and do all of those things. Also, I was pleased that Jeff Brennan, you all know Jeff. Jeff testified on several occasions for us also on our bills, and most of those bills have received a favorable recommendation, and they're starting to move forward through the process. The one bill, and I've talked about this a lot because I believe in it so much, given that I'm a volunteer in my town in Ipswich, been a member of our zoning board for the past 18 years, chaired our master plan commission, served on a subcommittee to the planning board. This is our legislation that would require all volunteers who serve on planning boards, zoning boards of appeal, boards of health, and conservation commissions would have to undergo pre-service training before they can sit on a zoning board, or planning board, conservation commission, and so on. This training would be provided by the Commonwealth free of charge. When we started talking about this bill a number of years ago, logistical concerns were raised. Well, you know, where would these trainings be held? How often would they be held? This would be such an inconvenience to volunteers to drive to Boston to go. Well, of course, this training would all be online now. So those concerns are gone. And in fact, we've developed quite a few allies in support of this legislation. I think it would help our members tremendously because, I'm sorry. I think it would help our members tremendously because, you know, it's one thing for members of a planning board or a conservation to vote against your project or put conditions on it because, you know, they're against the project. But it has to be quite infuriating when they don't know the law and they think they know what they're doing and putting on these conditions. You know, my view is if you're charged with enforcing the law, you should know something about it. And this legislation, I think, has actually a very good chance of becoming law this year before the session is out. I guess the last thing I would say, just sort of generally, is, you know, it is an election year. Everyone in this room on this Zoom shares, you know, my disappointment that Charlie Baker and Karen Polito aren't going to be running for office again. But I have to tell you, I think we are looking at a Maura Healey administration. There's really no opposition to her in the Democratic primary. State Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, she's not going anywhere. I think she's going to roll to victory quite easily this fall. I will say that both my law partner, Patricia, and I do know Maura Healey. We've worked with her. We've worked with people up at the AG's office. And of course, she is, you know, she's not a Republican. She's a liberal Democrat. But I will tell you that she is very, very smart. I do believe she will listen. I know she's concerned about housing. And we will do our job on your behalf to make those relations with them, to make those connections with them so that they understand us, our members, and be supportive of our agenda. You know, every time there's a change of administration or a new speaker, a new Senate president, what have you, friends of mine, because most of you know, I've been doing this a long, long time, starting with Ed King, when Ed King was governor. And they always say to me, well, Ben, you know, you have all these friends in the King administration or the Cellucci administration or the Jane Swift administration, Romney, you know, and now they're gone. What are you going to do? I say, well, I'll just make new friends. And that's our job on your behalf, to make those conditions, commitment, make those relations and advance your agenda where we can. So it's going to be an interesting year, be even more interesting year next year, but that's the ways off. We have a lot of challenges between now and then. Carol, Russ, Ryan?
That was great. Does anybody have any questions, Ben?
You know, I have a question. So is the building industry in America, are we pushing towards following a European model where everything is no more fossil fuels? I mean, that's what someone told me, that's pretty much the way they're going over there.
Mm-hmm.
what you're-
With prices being as high as they are.
Right. Considering Massachusetts has the highest, I believe, the highest electric rates in the nation. Well, let me just say that the building industry, we're certainly not leading that charge. And Rob will share you his thoughts. And Rob, I made sure I didn't steal your thunder. But as Rob, I most certainly did. But Rob will tell you both on the issue he's going to talk about, but also having just been to the NAHB meeting in Orlando. We are on the tip of the spear here. Massachusetts and California. And that is obviously because of the politics of this state, of California, because of the strength of the environmental organizations, the climate activists. You're right about Europe. And there is no question that that's where the environmentalists want to go. Again, I'll let Rob talk about this, but let me just say that, and I think maybe Russ alluded to this because of our work with the Interconnection Working Group, there's a real concern about the grid and the capacity. Because certainly if we could turn a switch, not to make a pun, and make all homes in Massachusetts electric, and every car was electric, we would have rolling blackouts and brownouts because the grid cannot sustain it. And one irony I find with the push to ban natural gas is earlier this winter, back in January, when we had some extremely cold days. Do you know that ISO and their providers, they had to go from burning natural gas to burning oil. And in one instance, actually burning coal, this remaining coal plant that we have in New England. Those 2 days did more to undermine the state's efforts to address greenhouse gas emissions than all the efforts of the past year. And that's because there's not enough capacity. But builders are going to have to learn to adapt. There's going to be a cost impact, but we're hoping for some policies that will mitigate some of those impacts.
And we're hoping that transition, it gives it enough time to happen because the transfers have to be updated and all those things on the infrastructure piece. But until we develop more ways to develop electricity, we're still going to have this problem with having to have coal plants and gas to develop the power that we're transmitting. So it's a real problem. It's going to take a long time for that to resolve itself. Anybody else have a question? And I saw a little thing on the news that I wasn't quite understanding of it, and I heard Governor Baker make reference to the fact that they were looking at a program that would have some tax benefit to renters where they could claim some of their rent through their taxes. Have you seen that?
I believe that's part of the governor's package of tax cuts that includes increasing the threshold for the estate tax. For instance, the governor testified, what is today? Today's Thursday. The governor testified Tuesday, actually in the State House, before the Revenue Committee on his package of proposed tax cuts. I don't know yet what's going to happen with those. But that's what I know, Russ.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much, Ben.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, Lillian.
Hi, Ben. Good to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you. All right. Is Rob up next?
He is.
I'm here.
Great.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Lillian, so nice to, at the very least, if I'm not in your conference room, I'm at least looking at your beautiful conference room and conference table. So thank you for hosting this, and thank you for hosting me virtually. So as Ben alluded to, well, first of all, for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, Rob Brennan. I am a builder and developer from the Cape. Prior to that, I was a real estate and land use and environmental attorney for almost 20 years. I currently chair the state's Government Affairs Committee, and just recently at IBS a couple weeks ago was appointed to the NAHB State and Local Government Affairs Committee, kind of doing the same kind of work, but looking at across all 50 states, and I'll be serving for this coming year as an alternate delegate to the NAHB Leadership Council, working alongside Andrew and Gary Campbell and others. So this past year, a lot of the focus of the Government Affairs Committee has been on this pending net zero code, which now, as I saw the article that Ryan had sent around to everyone, was released actually while we were at IBS. And we have been, lobbying and working with the administration, with and through Ben, going into the release of this. So I think, concerns that we had an opportunity, to express directly to the Lieutenant Governor, including at the event that Lillian hosted a couple months ago, working directly with Secretary Theoridis and Secretary Keneally, and really, expressing the concern that when the legislature acted in adopting, the statute a year ago, mandating, the development and promulgation of a quote unquote net zero code, that it was done, through the legislature really without taking into consideration cost implications and what those cost implications would have on housing affordability, what detrimental impacts on housing affordability would have on housing production, and really just generally not looking at this issue from an intersection of housing policy and climate policy. So a lot of our work on multiple levels, and I'll tell you about some of the things that we were really successful with, and all of this, seems to have come, together during this past month. But the concern, had been, in moving, toward that kind of a European model that someone had mentioned, eliminating all, fossil fuel emissions, from homes, requiring, increased standards in terms of window glazing, insulation, mandating, on-site renewable production, what all of those, costs would have if they were not able to be passed on and paid by buyers. So the first thing that I should mention that is kicking off actually this week is that we had been putting together for the industry, for the state, and really, to put in the hands of lobbyists like Ben and the administration and the legislature, a study that objectively looked at, at three things. Number one, looking at what the cost was, to move to the code where it is now, and again, assuming that the stretch code, which has been adopted by almost 300 towns, but what is the difference moving from the stretch code, to what the increased requirements would be under this, this net zero code, this, which is now perhaps not in final form, but has been released. So again, starting out, what is the cost increase when you change the code, and looking at, every delta, right? Every time one provision is changed, whether it's regard to mandating heat pumps, with regard to increased insulation, increased windows, on-site ready solar, EV charging, what are all of those incremental cost deltas? Then adding all of those up and looking at, what is the impact going to be on housing affordability? I know, we had a study which has just recently been updated. I haven't seen the updated numbers, but NAHB every year does an affordability study, and they do it for every state. And in Massachusetts, what we know is that when you go from the median house cost, which, or house price, which is around, $600,000, and you move that and you increase it by every 1,000, then that falls out of affordability for about 2,000 individuals and families. So, the impact of increased housing prices, what that does to affordability. So that was the second, part of this study. And the third part was to identify the tools that needed to be added to the table, those that needed to be beefed up, so that we could offset those increased costs and avoid those detrimental impacts on housing affordability and housing production. So we went out and we approached MIT. MIT, enthusiastically hopped on board. Specifically, we're working with the MIT Center for Real Estate, which is a graduate program within MIT, almost exclusively populated by master's and PhD students who come out of the real estate industry as kind of mid-career students. So it's folks that have practical grounding in real estate. We teamed them up with the construction management program from Wentworth Institute of Technology. And Wentworth, with their alumni network and boots on the ground, were charged with the first part, actually quantifying what the code changes, we're going to add in terms of costs to housing production. And again, that would be handed off to MIT for the second and third parts. MIT will be the one crunching the numbers and on housing affordability and housing production, and putting tools on the table. And when we talk about putting tools on the table, the things that we're talking about, are obviously much more robust mass save program rebates, which, by the way, are now being reflected even in the draft code. That's something, again, that we have been lobbying the administration for. We really had been beating the drum that this needs to be, in moving to net zero, it really needs to be about housing and climate, and that costs need to be considered. So we've been beating that drum. We've been having very positive discussions with the administration. They've been bringing us in early on, Ben, myself, Emerson, obviously being appointed to the Commission for Clean Heat and others. So our voices have been heard. The efforts and the benefits of our efforts are being reflected already. But this is going to be, a study that is going to be, done by two very respected universities, looking at, a very practical, view of moving to net zero. And again, having tools on the table, not just a, more robust mass save program, but looking at, the availability of tax credits, looking at, pairing adoption at the municipal level of net zero with increased density bonuses, for development that's being done, to these increased energy standards that carry with it higher costs, and having, increased density be, an obvious tool that could offset those costs. There's also a federal tax credit that you may be aware of. It's called the 45L. It actually sunset at the end of 21. It's proposed to be brought back as a component of the Biden administration Build Back Better infrastructure bills, and that originally provided a $2,000 tax credit, federal tax credit, for boosting energy performance of new construction. That obviously needs to go to a higher number, and that is a tool that we expect that MIT is going to focus on as well. The cost of that is $200,000, for that study. We have, gone out to NAHB, we've gone out to industry partners, we've gone out to for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, throughout the state. And currently we have raised $230,000, which covers the cost of the study. And then we still have existing asks out there for about another $100,000, including from utility companies and some other developers. So, we expect we'll be fully funded for that study that is launched already. MIT faculty and Wentworth faculty have been relieved by their universities of their teaching commitments. They are solely focused on this, and we've got I think a fantastic team. They'll be coming out with the preliminary findings in late spring. We'll put that in front of the administration, in front of the legislature, as they are gathering comments and finalizing, what this code is going to be. And I think, we expect that we're going to have a great deal of success, at really redefining the conversation, to be one that's about housing and climate. And then the diverse group that we've assembled, we've got on one end, Toll Brothers, and we've got, Eversource, SunPower, Propane Council, Mitsubishi. We also have, nonprofit developers, Housing Assistance Corporation, and the Archdiocese of Boston's arm that does nonprofit affordable housing development. So everyone has come together in really defining this move to net zero as one that has implications and benefits not only on the climate side, but has sensitivities and potential consequences that need to be avoided, on the housing side. So in addition to the study, we also at IBS, which was the annual meeting for NAHB, we introduced Massachusetts a resolution for adoption at the national level, really following the structure of the study and the structure of how we have, I think, successfully defined the discussion here at the state level, along those three components, looking at the costs, looking at what the impacts would be if those costs aren't offset, and making sure that on the table, we have the tools to offset those costs as we're looking at net zero codes. So the resolution proposed, that NAHB would advocate for any discussion of net zero to include those three factors. And, those of you that may have, been involved at the national level or seen, historically what the national approach has been, it really has been one of just opposing, proposed code changes. And certainly, on issues of climate change, NAHB, is not what I would call, the most liberal leaning organization. So, it's not a debate or, in which NAHB had historically been engaged. It really had been one more of kind of disconnecting, from the debate and looking perhaps at being critical of studies. This year, I can tell you, that NAHB's engagement on how it's going to, deal with net zero codes and deal with climate matters going forward it's been a significant change. Our resolution went through 14 committees in a 36-hour period. Myself and Joe Landers were escorted in and out of committee meetings that ranged everything from, real estate finance to the Home Renovation Council to Land Development Council, 14 different committees and councils, all of whom endorsed the resolution, and then the resolution was adopted by vote of the delegates by over 90%. So again, it was a very successful initiative. It's what's being referred to at the national level as the Massachusetts model. Really defining that intersection of housing and climate and ensuring that, costs are offset, which is really a bare minimum standard. I mean, as we all know, we need to be doing more to support housing production. This one really, aimed lower than we probably should be aiming, and just said that any climate policy should not have an adverse effect on housing production. But, committee after committee and member after member, acknowledged that this was a radical change, for NAHB to really start engaging on the in the climate debate and kind of setting the ground rules for that. And, about halfway through, it dawned on us, we needed some buzzwords here. And so, we started kind of describing this initiative of focusing on cost as introducing a new term, in the climate debate, and not, you take on the one hand climate deniers, which is a term that, has been thrown around. And we, introduced to that discussion cost deniers, right? So that this really was targeted at cost deniers, because as the articles in the Globe, that may have seen, because now they're focusing, they have a whole section focusing on climate. Whenever they talk about the new move to net zero or what builders should be doing, they always start off with the phrase at little to no cost, right? And we know that that's not the case, but if it's defined as little to no cost, then you're not going to have the tools at the table to offset those. So really, that was a big focus of what we were aiming to achieve and that we did achieve. And this Massachusetts model, of defining any climate discussion on ground rules of cost impacts and offsets is really starting to gain traction. And it's worth mentioning that, defining that that intersection of housing and climate is not only gaining traction, with the administration, as we see in the straw code that came out, but believe it or not, it's gaining traction, with climate activists. And, we, on the Cape, we started seeing kind of a big overlap between, folks that were showing up for discussions of climate and folks that were showing up for discussions of housing affordability and housing production. So also, during that same week of IBS, Chris Flanagan, who's the executive officer for the home builders and remodelers of Cape Cod, connected with the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative. And together they submitted a joint proposal to Barnstable County to use $5 million of Barnstable County's ARPA money, that American, Rescue Plan, kind of that COVID package, but taking 5 of their $49 million or $48 million and putting that into a program that would fund net zero upgrades for new workforce and affordable housing construction. So again, it was the climate folks recognizing that move to net zero carries with it costs, and also recognizing that if they want housing, those costs have to be offset. So I thought that was, that was very, a very positive development. And it showed again, that by defining this conversation of one of housing and climate, we really were on the right track. So that was largely, how the month of February was spent, with a lot of, lead time going into that. What's next on the horizon for the Government Affairs Committee? We're going to be launching a blog on housing and climate, and that is going to be under housingandclimate.org. We're also going to have the .com, I guess, to go around it, but it's going to be to start collecting, not only our own writings, but writings around the country, supporting the notion that net zero carries with it costs, and those costs need to be offset to support continued housing. We also are looking at a candidate, boot camp, model. This was Ken Eckert, who's again one of the at NAHB, one of the legal and lobbying representatives. And NAHB for years, I guess, has been doing a candidate boot camp where they'll come into states and using housing and housing production as a platform, work with folks who are interested in getting on local town councils, folks that are looking at running for state rep or state senate, but really recruiting from among the building community candidates, including candidates to start going on to even local planning boards and zoning boards. Housing provides a natural platform through NEBA, through HB Rama, and through NAHB. We have incredible resources to be able to, educate candidates, to prepare candidates, to really put housing as a package platform in the hands of members to be able to go and speak, make their cases to town councils, to get put onto boards, and make their cases, to voters to get elected as their representatives, on whatever level, to be talking about, real things that need to happen, and, real ideas that can be put forward to advance housing production. Don't know if anyone in the room has ever, had or harbors thoughts of running for office, but it's a program that we're going to be putting together over, the coming year plus maybe, and hopefully being able to make this available, to members, to get more folks elected, more folks like the Lieutenant Governor, who came out of a family of builders. So that's, again, a lot of the focus that the Government Affairs Committee has had over the past several months, what's on our plate right now and what's immediately ahead of us. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or, expand on any points.
Rob, we first want to thank you for all the time you put into this program for us on our behalf. You and the other committee members done an outstanding job on this. And we see the stuff that's going back and forth and the different things you're working on, and we thank you. We know how much time it takes to do what you're doing, and we really appreciate that. And we're so fortunate to have you in this class. Anybody have any questions, Rob? We're letting you walk awful easy here, Rob.
Yeah. No, available at any time, and I hope that, urge folks to, to get involved, with these initiatives. We have a great group. We enjoy doing the work, but, we do the work so that, so that you folks can continue doing your great work. It's really a privilege to be in this position, and I look forward to, to getting to know and working with other folks on things going forward.
Anybody on the Zoom call have any questions? People hearing none.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and thank you, Lillian, for hosting this. Thank you all.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Good job, everybody.
Lots of good information.
Okay. I would say, right, nobody has any other questions. There weren't any chatting going on. Right on time, actually a little